Hi, my name is Tanya Shannon. I'm a master's student within the School of Public Administration at Florida State. I will be doing my presentation on the disaster management systems in India. I actually am in India currently. I am an intern at the Indian Institute of Public Administration, and I've been doing research on Indian disaster systems for the last 2 months and will be here for another month. I have been fortunate enough to work underneath Dr. V.K. Sharma, who wrote the legislation that creating the disaster system that exists today in 2005, and I've been able to interview a number of the individuals that are the key decision makers and public administrators within the system. So I hope you guys will find my presentation entertaining and informative. Disaster management in India within modern times dates back to the British rule in the early 1900s. Their focus was mainly response and recovery in the interest of the British population. After independence, the Indian government adopted the infrastructure that they had established and just adapted it to be focused on responding to Indian populations. This manifested mostly at the state level. In the 1990s, the International Decade for Natural Disaster Reduction was declared by the United Nations. In response to this, India established the Department of Disaster Management, but placed it within the Ministry of Agriculture. After a series of catastrophic disasters that resulted in over tens of thousands of fatalities, India adopted the Disaster Management Act of 2005, while within the same year that they signed the Hyogo Protocol. This is the framework that was established after the Disaster Management Act of 2005 was created. The Government of India, within their Ministry of Home Affairs, created the National Disaster Management Authority. This is the equivalent to the U.S.'s FEMA. Within the NDMA, they have a specific law enforcement force called the National Disaster Response Force. This is a 10 battalion, over 1,000 men and women who are specifically trained to respond to natural and man-made disasters. They are always on duty and able to respond to any disaster that occurs within India and have been deployed internationally. The state disaster management authorities are each located within every state and union territory of India. Within the subdivision of that are the district disaster management authorities. Districts are similar to the U.S. counties. Under the DDMAs are local first responders, such as law enforcement and firefighters, also more local authorities, such as panchayats and other individuals, and also incident response teams, which are specifically designed 5 to 7 man teams that are responsible to be the first responders and commanders at a disaster site. Policy-wise, the authority is a top-down mechanism. The NDMA sets a guideline or a policy. SDMAs have to follow it. They can clarify further what they require from their DDMAs, and that so on and so forth, that DDMAs can set further guidelines for their local first responders, local authorities, and incident response teams. However, in reality, only a few states have further elaborated on the plan set by the National Disaster Management Authority. However, in the implementation after a disaster, it is supposed to be a bottom-up system. Local first responders and incident response teams are supposed to be the first ones on site, and they then report to the DDMAs, and then if their resources are overwhelmed, they then request assistance from the state disaster management authorities, and so on and so forth. The National Disaster Management Authority is only supposed to be acting as an advisory and function, and also as emergency support functions. The National Disaster Response Force can be called upon by any level of government. This is where some of the confusion comes in on whether or not it is a bottom-up system. While they do claim that it is a bottom-up system, I spoke with the commander of recently retired commander of the National Disaster Response Force, and he gave me a number of anecdotes of when there were building collapses or natural disasters that he sent his men before even being requested by any level of government. He said his first priority is the safety of lives, and he knows his men are the best to do that. So he gave an example of a building that collapsed in Pune, which is a little bit north of Mumbai, that one of his battalions were stationed in Pune, and they were one of the first responders. They took incident command, and they ran the response for a couple days after the disaster. So there is a policy system of the bottom up. They did create an incident response system, which is very closely based off of our the United States' incident command system, with very few differences. But there still is some confusion as they work out some of the details since 2005. India is one of the most prone to disaster countries in the world. It is within the top 10. Here is a list of the natural and man-made disasters that affect India. The quote, "earthquakes don't kill people, buildings kill people," rings true in India. The unplanned development and the failure to develop basic infrastructure in large portions of the country, urban and rural, is creating more vulnerability than the government can even respond to. Here's a photo from just my drive home from work. These rickety buildings that I can't say from any expertise, but they do not seem very sound, and they line the streets for miles and miles. NGOs have shifted their attention from disaster response and recovery to mitigation and education. And with one of the projects is building code enforcement, trying to educate the public on what building codes are, and for them to request that their developers build their homes and their businesses according to those codes. However, basic issues such as drainage continue to be a problem. It was rather funny at a conference that I went to. They were talking about all these schemes and plans that they had on how to improve the disaster management system, but then the executive director of NDMA stood up and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, we are talking about all these advanced things. However, we have not figured out basic drainage for our cities. We need to address those problems first." Here is a photo of a drainage holes. These holes are often full of trash and debris, and are not very effective during the rains, when the rains come. These two photos are photos that I've taken, again, on my drive home from work. They were basically after only 2 hours of rain, and I looked it up afterwards. There was only about 5 millimeters of rain each time. However, both times, this minimal amount of rain resulted in feet of flooding throughout the city. Just the drainage systems do not have the capacity to deal with any kind of water. And this is in Delhi, the capital of India. So these basic infrastructural issues are going to continue to plague India's disaster management until they are resolved. Dr. Reddy has said it perfectly at a conference that I had been at. He announced to the audience that we have come far, however, we have a lot more work to do. This is true for India. They have come far from basic relief and recovery practices to now a policy that is holistic and comprehensive. However, now that the policy is established on the national level, public administrators and experts have quite a challenge on their hands. Now they have to implement this policy. The slogan in India's disaster management authority is, we will build back better. And India is showing that they will. It just will take time. Thank you.